Okay, so the last couple of weeks I've been talking about plots and plotting. So today I'm going to share one more aspect of plotting, and that is the subplot. So we're going to talk about why you want to create a subplot, if you should create a subplot, and how to do it if you choose to create a subplot.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Amante channel. I'm happy to have you here and happy to share with you some writing tips that I hope will help you write your book. Subplots are great because they add complexity to your story. They also help with developing your main character, and they give you a lot of other opportunities to develop your story if they're handled correctly. So let's talk about how to do that. So the first thing to remember to think about is that your subplot shouldn't be a completely separate story. So you're not running two main stories all in the same book, right? So you don't have like character A's story and then you have character B's story and they're going in separate directions. Your subplot should relate to your main story, to your main character in some way. Okay, so sometimes there's a similar theme within the main plot and the subplot, and that's sometimes a good way of doing that. So for example, you might have a theme that lost loves always influence your life, or they influence your life forever, or something like that, right? So the main character might be going through their own love situation. The second character, the main character, the secondary character, so let's say there's a subplot with the best friend. Maybe the best friend moves back into town because of an old love or a lost love. And that main character's story might show that her life changed forever because of that lost love. So again, similar theme. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if it runs side by side with the main theme, the main character, it'll reinforce what's happening in the main character's life. Okay, and then sometimes what you can do with a theme is you can show almost the opposite, or just another aspect of the theme. So again, you don't want it to be completely different. So you want it to be a completely different story. But in one of my novels, for example, and this is Now, I have a story about the main character who comes home to take care of an ill parent and is an old love. It's really her friend now, but they tried dating for a while, didn't work out, became friends. But as she comes back, she starts to re-explore that relationship. She's taking care of her mother, but she's also kind of falling in love with this guy again. And her sister, her younger sister, is sort of the opposite. She actually married her high school sweetheart. She fell in love. She got married very young. She had children, and now she's experiencing sort of the difficulties of marriage, the difficulties of love, showing again the opposite of falling in love. It's not really not falling in or falling out of love. Her younger sister is not really falling out of love, but showing the difficulties of relationships and love and marriage. So it's a little subplot that's going off on the side, and the two sisters are able to talk and give each other advice because of these two different relationship experiences that they're having. Another great thing about subplots is that it can help you to develop your main character better. So if you have, and sometimes people do this with things like flashbacks, right? Or running a subplot of something that happened in the past. Like it could be the main character and then maybe the story of the grandmother back when she was younger. Again, it could you don't want it to be a completely separate story that unless you want that. I mean, unless you really want two stories in one, you want two main stories, and I've seen writers do that effectively. But if you are just thinking subplot, if you just want a subplot, then you want to make sure that your main plot stays your main plot, and then these flashbacks are just little tiny snippets that are showing something that the grandmother is going through that maybe she shares with her granddaughter in the present. And the goal really of doing something like that with a flashback would really be how those things in the past have affected the present, right? Another story, one that I read, that had a woman who was having difficulties with her marriage and her, with her life and her marriage. And at the same time, she was caring for a sick mother. This is not my story, it was somebody else's story. And she, what the subplot shows, the subplot of her, really the main plot really was her caring for her mother, but she had that rocky relationship with her marriage. The marriage was almost the subplot, but actually through the main plot, it actually explains the subplot, which was kind of interesting because it was a little kind of a twist. The sick mom who is dying through this main story was a terrible person. She was a drug addict. She didn't take care of, well, she didn't take care of her children at all. When she did, she didn't take care of them well. She had various men that she would date. So this character in her marriage is very controlling, and this is one of the reasons she's having such a difficult time. So we kind of need the subplot to show what she is like now as an adult. But the reason that she is this way and the reason she's having difficulties in her relationship is because of the things that she went through as a child, which is part of the main plot. You could almost say there's two subplots, right? The subplot of her as a child, when she remembers things that happened with her mom. The current plot is her taking care of mom, but then there's a subplot of her as a child, plus there's a subplot of her marriage. So it can get complicated. So the bigger the story is, the more complicated the story is. You might have multiple subplots, but the point is that you want to make sure that they relate to each other and that they help to develop the character. They help to develop to show the reader how and why the character is the way that they are. Another reason that you might want to have a subplot is to raise the tension of your story or raise the stakes of your story. So, for example, you could have, let's say, a cop, a police officer who has an interfering parent. So it could create a little bit of comedy, but it could also create some tension if this parent is always interfering in the cases of the cop, right? And the subplot could be around the parent, like why is this parent doing this? Maybe the parent used to be a cop also and is now feeling like he's not, he doesn't have a purpose and he wants to help his son to do his job. And so you could build that subplot, right? The relationship between the parent and the child, and the parent's experience in the past and the way that he's having a hard time letting go of his old career and of his child could be a subplot that influences that main character and the way he does his job. And in something like that, it could also increase, the comedy. It could also increase the tenderness of the relationship between the child and the older parent. But subplots that increase the complexity of the hero's journey, build the tension, or threaten the character's life in some way are great because, again, it builds that tension, it builds more obstacles for your character. And so those type of subplots can be really, really good and really effective, make the reader even more interested in your main story. And I know sometimes readers get frustrated with subplots, right? So if the subplot really doesn't have a good connection to the main plot, when the story jumps to the subplot, the reader's like, oh gosh, let me page through that and get back to the main story. And that's what you don't want. So the better you can tie your subplot into the main plot so that you know that whatever's happening in the subplot is going to affect that main plot, though you're not going to lose your reader. Your reader's going to want to read that subplot because they know that it's going to affect that main plot as well. Another thing that your subplot can do is change the pacing of your story or affect the pacing of your story, and that's a good thing because sometimes it depends on the story you're writing, right? So if you're writing a fast-paced story, a thriller type story where a lot is happening, a lot of things are going on, then you don't want continual fast-paced because you'll exhaust your reader. You need some time to rest and think. So sometimes you can achieve that in the main plot just by having your character rest or do something different other than the chase, right? But other times is you can jump to a subplot where something else is happening. The character might be dealing with a different issue. So not only are they chasing the bad guy, but they're also maybe have a teenage daughter who needs help and you need to take care of this family issue, right? So that, first of all, it makes your your character more well-rounded. He's got other things other than just his job. But also it does change the pacing. So from the action, the threat of the person being killed or something bad happening, there's also that other moment where things are going, it's a family thing or a family picnic they're going to, or something different that changes the pacing. So remember to give your hero another issue to deal with, people to talk to, other interests that he can move to when he's not involved in that really, that main storyline of finding the bad guy or whatever. But it doesn't even have to be just thrillers. There can be other stories where we just want to have multiple things happening so that you're not always dealing. So even like a romance, right, where it's the hero and the heroine and it's always them and it's always about the relationship. It can get a little tiring, and you might want to have a little subplot where the heroine is dealing with something else. So she's not just dealing with the relationship, but maybe her business is falling apart or something else is happening that captures her attention so that the reader can move away from that like very intense sexual tension type of relationship. In other words, give your readers time to breathe and time to relax so that they don't get overwhelmed with your story. So let's talk about introducing and maintaining those subplots. So you want to introduce your subplots early in your story. That first act, that beginning of Act 2, you want to have those subplots somewhere in the beginning, because you don't want to start a subplot like near the end of your story. You want these subplots to develop through right with your main story. In fact, each one of your subplots should have its own arc, right? So in my story with the sister who was having a difficult time with her marriage because she got married so young and had children so young, and then the main plot line where she's actually re-falling in love with somebody. The sister's arc, she also had an arc. She also had, like, what is it that she wants? She wanted to have some time to go back to school and get her education and get her degree. And she wanted to follow that, but she's so overwhelmed with her husband and her kids that she can't do that. So she has her arc too. She has a desire, she has a goal. And her sister has a goal, right? So we want to make sure that our subplots are also following an arc. It doesn't have to be as intense as the main one, but it should have one. So that means that if you want there to be a complete arc, you want to start close to the beginning. So obviously you're starting with your main story, but at some point when you branch off into a subplot, you want it to be pretty early in the story. Also, think of this as multiple threads, right? So you have this very long thread, and that's your main story. But then you have these other little threads that are going off of the main story. So remember two things. One is that you want to have that arc for each one of these. You want to have that, that beginning, that crisis moment, that resolution. But you want to weave it back into the main story. So you don't want your main story going up and then you have these long, subplots that are going this way and then they don't even come back until the end. You want them to weave in and out of the main story. So you have this subplot here and it's going to come back. And then you have this one here that's going to come back. So bring them back to the main story in and out. Don't forget them. So one of the things that I like to do is, especially when I'm finished with my first draft, or my rough draft, is I will say, okay, I have subplot A, B, and C. And so here's where A starts, here's where B starts, here's where C starts. If it's been 2-3 chapters and one of these subplots has not come back or intersected with my main plot for some reason, I want to make sure that I do it. If I find that I can't, that this one is just going off on its own, maybe this is a different story. So maybe I need to cut this off. If it cannot merge back into my main story, then it's really not a subplot. It's its own plot. It's its own story, and I need to take it out. So make sure that you're not forgetting it. Make sure that you're coming back to it. If you can't think of a way to bring it back, then think about cutting it out of your story. That interconnectedness or that, converging of stories is really, really satisfying to readers. They really love that because they can start seeing why you're even talking about this subplot. Like, why is it important? And again, the more connected it is to your main story, then the more sense it's going to make and the more it's going to be easier to do that, right? So if I have that story of that police officer, and the subplot is that the dad is getting in the way and wanting to solve his mystery, or wanting to get involved in his cases, it's going to be easy for me to have scenes with dad plotting to get involved, or dad showing up at the cop, his place of work, or showing up at a crime scene. So having dad in and out is not going to be difficult because it's super connected to the main story. However, with a story like the one that I did with two sisters and one having relationship issues, one falling in love, it could have been very easy for me to really run one story by itself, right? Because she could have her own challenges with her husband and her children and her thing, and completely forget about the main story and not have it. But I had to make sure that it was intersecting, that one was giving another one advice, that things were happening, where when the main character is noticing the issues that the younger sister is having, things like that. So, and to make sure that I showed the connection, right? Like maybe the main character is saying, well, this is why I never got involved in really. This is why I didn't. Why did she have to start, get married so young and so forth? So, tie them together. It gives the reader it gives the story a tight fit, and it gives the reader a lot of satisfaction to see that these stories are connected. So should you have subplots? Should you include these into your story? Well, it depends. You don't have to. If the main story is interesting enough on its own, and it's not going to, and you can maintain that story without it becoming too heavy or not having enough pacing, or any of the other problems, then stick with your one story. If you think that you can add to your story by having these subplots, then you should. So it's just like, anything else in life. It's sometimes sprinkling it with different things. You're making a meal and add a few things or have a few side dishes. It makes it a more fulfilling meal. It makes it much nicer. So if you want to have these, if you think they fit your story, if you think that the reader will enjoy it, then definitely use subplots in your novel. It's not necessary, but it can give your story a more layered and a richer feel. Okay, so I hope that you have enjoyed these 3 videos on plotting. I hope that it's added to what you already know, made you think about it again, or maybe in a new way. So if you have enjoyed these videos, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you again next week.